So, it appears as though Helen Pluckrose has decided not to debate us today on critical race theory. I believe that means that we win in the marketplace of ideas. This is officially the point at which the Enlightenment... I don't know if we've defeated the Enlightenment or we've represented the Enlightenment. I'm not sure which one, but something has happened as we've demonstrated that Helen Pluckrose appears to be afraid to discuss critical race theory. And she's done so. We've invited her to join us. And my name is actually not E.R., it's Eric. And we're here with several guests. I'll introduce our special guest shortly, but we'll start with our regular crew of free speech warriors, including I'll do it in a different order this time. So here we have Some Guy. Some Guy, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Eric. I'm
Okay.
Some Guy, and once again, I've been accidentally platformed this week on the show.
Okay.
It just keeps happening.
It keeps happening. You should really probably turn your camera off or something. Put the tape on top. And next up, we have the Woke Sorcerer joining us again. Hello, Woke Sorcerer.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Hi, how are you? I'm good.
Very
Thanks
good.
for trying to keep cool. It's very, very hot here.
Is this down in London?
Otherwise, I am down in the Big Smoke, indeed, yes. Where I'm being platformed from London. So that's good to know that London's being represented.
Okay, good,
You know.
good.
Minority
And,
as we are.
And the topic of our show is who's afraid of critical race theory. And so for this purpose, we've started a new format here where we're actually getting experts to discuss this rather than just us sort of pontificating on our own thoughts, however informed they are. So in this instance, we've invited Sam Hoadley-Brill to join us. Sam, hello.
Greetings. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so
Thanks,
much
Sam.
for joining us.
Love.
I really enjoyed following that. You had an epic debate the other day that we'd love to to discuss with you. And you've also I think I first encountered your work in Liberal Currents, where you sort of body slammed Helen and James's cynical theories, which for whatever reason some people do think is a good book. I'm not sure. Maybe you can help us out with that.
They haven't read the review yet. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that's wonderful. I wonder if you wouldn't mind joining us for another feature that we have, just so you can kind of get on board with the program. So we obviously are interested in free speech issues, although not particularly from an angle in which there's a genuine problem, but more of the kind of the problem is the what's the word? The problem is the free speech moral panic, actually, and so that's actually what we're interested in. So let's see if we can start this new program, which will go through the top 3 issues of free speech in the UK since our last program 2 weeks ago. So here we go. So, the first thing that happened this week, I don't know if you've came across this, but we had Oxford College removed the Queen's portrait, and so this actually involves 2 of our wall of heroes. So we've been keeping a running list of all the people we've invited, and I've now added Helen to that list. Let's see if I can share that. So let's see. Here we are. So this is our wall of heroes at the moment. So Helen, we could change and to now she's not turned up, like most people have not turned up. Only one who's ever come is Eric Kaufman, and we'll discuss him in a minute. I don't know. Have you come across him, Sam?
I have indeed.
Yeah, we'll discuss him in relation to the Sewell report coming up, but Eric Hoffman did come on and did debate us, so that was nice of him to do.
Good for him.
So let's see. The actual news item was the following. I'll see if I could get this up for you. So. Here we are. So here we have Gavin Williamson, who's the education secretary, has been making new laws to insist that we have free speech and so forth. And he has decided that the Oxford College, I believe, is it Magdalen College? Joe, did you know more about this?
Yeah, it's Magdalen College, Oxford's MCR, which is basically like a common room for postgrad students where they like have coffee and stuff. It's really not a big thing. It's just where they hang out. The thing about this story, and this is where the free speech manufactured culture war is really useful for the government, is that it was a huge dead cat, because the same day it was announced that Michael Gove had broken parliamentary whatever rules. And so it was obvious that, Gav had been told, quick, you better tweet about how outraged you are about these students democratically deciding to no platform the Queen. And it was, and they ended up doxing. The Sun and the Mail ended up printing the address of the president of the MCR's parents' house.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And
it was just absolutely disgusting. But it was all to detract attention from the fact that Gove had been found to have shat himself in public or whatever it was.
Right.
Wait,
so it was just a big
literally?
storm in the teeth.
No. I think was it because
like,
he had gone to the football in Portugal? Was that it?
No, it was
okay.
something much more serious. It was to do with having. It was cash for mates again, wasn't it?
Oh, okay. It's always a problem. So apparently the Queen did not mind this. She was very happy with the students' free speech, which I feel like is really, really good of her. Did
she say that?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Good on the
She's
Queen.
probably
So
sick of
that's
seeing her own picture everywhere.
Well, yeah. So
She's
that's
probably
the first item. That's the first item. A storm in a teacup. Actually, not a non-issue. Second one is a bigger issue. Maya Forstater versus the Center for Global Development. This is involving the trans versus gender critical feminist issue, and a big deal had been made about this particular case, which was an appeal to the the employer tribunal. So that's going to be appealed. Now we won't spend too much time on this because it's very complicated, and we will probably have our own discussion of the legal issues around this in the future. But this is one of my favorite outcomes. So here's Maya Forstater talking about how the Justice Chowdhury said her views may well be profoundly offensive and even distressing. But he doesn't say that in the judgment at all. And then this is her own tweet.
No.
below that says the closest thing he says is both beliefs may well be profoundly offensive and even distressing to many others. So it's a bit hard to say how he doesn't say that.
Well, it's a post-truth.
He literally says that.
Bruh, no. The closest... It's...
Yeah, so this kind of feeds into some of the issues that we will get into with critical race theory. Is this kind of like willful... I didn't say that, but in fact you actually just said that.
I'm getting big Chris Rufo energy and big Helen Pluckrose energy.
Yeah, so that's how Forstater is responding to those things, and I think her main takeaway is that the judgment says gender critical views are worthy of respect, which I'm pretty sure he doesn't say anywhere. But
worthy of respect.
Last one I'm gonna look at is this particular Channel 4 documentary on the Sewell report. Have you come across this, Sam?
I'm
Sewell
familiar
race
with the
report.
report, but
Right.
not the documentary. Yeah.
Okay, so this is I may need to share my screen once more to get the sound up. But what we have here is, let's see, can we hear this?
I can hear.
It
Yeah.
was peer reviewed.
Great.
Yeah, thoroughly peer reviewed.
Officially.
Yes. What if it officially? What does that mean? It was the report was thoroughly peer reviewed.
Who peer reviewed it?
Lots of people involved in this was peer reviewed.
Who by your
All
understanding?
the experts
Who?
in each of the areas, we had it peer reviewed. You can't send out a government report into the public domain without peer reviewing going on.
Who
I mean,
peer
it's a-
reviewed it in your understanding?
What do you
Because
mean,
usually
it's in the report that in terms of our acknowledgements, we everybody goes through this. British,
Where? Show me.
British.
Show me.
For example, British Futures did a peer review of it. We've gone through the whole thing. So each section. I remember now, each person has done the peer review, but peer review it has been. Peer review is you.
So as it turns out, he couldn't think of anybody, but in the taxi ride home, someone clearly gave him a name to say that they had peer reviewed it, and that only person was Eric Kaufman. Was the
No
only-
way.
If you've
No, that's
if you've
a
ever
joke, right?
No, that's what the
ever
report
used it.
concludes. Yeah,
That's not. That's
the only time
that's
you really
truth.
need reviewer two.
That happened.
yeah, that's. So if you watch the rest of that documentary, I would encourage the report on the academic scholarship or lack thereof. There's some great moments. There's a.
joke that like Jason Stanley wrote or something.
I know it sounds like it's. But
Oh my
so
God.
often the truth is stranger than fiction with these things, I think. But yeah, I think the other what was it? The other thing that came out, there was a really absurd meeting with a historian of Black Britain who had been sort of invited to number 10, told to bring like a picture of his favorite Black British person, and that was it. And then he was like put in front of a Zoom with like 50 people and was told, okay, now's the time for your presentation. And he was like, it sounds like a Kafka thing. Like, he was like, why am I here? And then later he's cited as an academic who supported their report and stuff. So,
Oh yeah! Wow! Yeah.
so this might be a good chance to get into, what on earth is going on with critical race theory at the moment? Why is this the most urgent concern for folks today?
Well, there are a lot of things leading together, sort of confluence of different influence of different things, just shenanigans, basically. So the term has gained uptake in popular discourse in the U.S. largely thanks to Fox News and other conservative outlets. Of course, mostly Fox News, but the first person to start really peddling it on Fox News was this guy named Chris Rufo. Okay. Chris Rufo is a filmmaker, kind of like wannabe journalist, who, before doing all this stuff, he ran for city council in Seattle on a platform of like putting homeless people in sort of like, if not jail, some sort of camp. Because there was people who didn't want to be around homeless people. He lost that, then started to get obsessed with critical race theory around this time last year, started posting articles to the City Journal website. He got a post at City Journal, which is a conservative think tank magazine based in New York City, and started to get these so-called whistleblower documents from people who would send him stuff that they thought was super outrageous from certain diversity trainings or materials that were handed out at work, say like a reading list, right? Because this was sort of immediately post George Floyd. And there were a lot of companies trying to sort of posture as good, woke, anti-racist, progressive people. And so then he started to do that. And eventually it took off when he went on Tucker Carlson a couple times. That led to Trump establishing an executive order banning critical race theory trainings from the federal government in September. And then things sort of died down for a while. Biden rescinded the order when he took office in January. And then Chris Rufo took that very personally and decided to start up his anti-CRT one-man war, as he called it, all over again. And that's when we started to really get the articles he was publishing about critical race theory and education and K through 12 education taking over. And
scary.
There we go.
Scary stuff. But there's points at which, doesn't he say publicly, he sort of says what we're going to do is change the meaning of the words. He's not very skilled at keeping this in the shadows.
And even now, those tweets have been cited in Washington Post articles. I'm pretty sure New York Times articles, and he leaves them up. He's left the tweets up. They're up there. Basically, what they say are, we have successfully frozen the term critical race theory into the public sphere, and we're steadily driving up. Do I have this memorized now? That would be crazy. We're steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we associate it with all the various cultural insanities. The goal is to have someone read something crazy in the newspaper and think critical race theory. That's all I can remember. I feel like I'm missing one sentence out of those two tweets, but yeah. And he announced it publicly.
Well, because I'm struck. I'm curious as to what Joe and Leon think as well, because it started to come up in the UK in this weird way, critical race theory. All of a sudden, everyone was worried about it. But I've not been here for as long. Was this a problem, or not that you two would think it was a problem? But has anyone even dealt with critical race theory before this year in England?
It's definitely something that I've only really seen quite recently. I think the problem is that people don't really understand what it is, and they assume that it means, all white people are racist or something, and they get very upset. So ultimately, I think it has definitely been something. I think since the George Floyd protests in the States and the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it's something that's been certainly that we've heard a lot more about. But if I'm honest with you, I don't know. Possibly some guy has had more interaction with this stuff, given that his scholarship on modern China. But I don't know. What do you think?
What do you think, some guy?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Well, I mean, same as Joe, I haven't really, critical race theory as a phrase just hasn't really been on the radar until, essentially last year. It's basically been it's like many other kinds of posting diseases. It just kind of started as, in this case, this particular guy posting endlessly about CRT. And then it just kind of, like many of these things, it just kind of crept across the Atlantic via social media. And it's sort of, it's now functioning mostly in the UK as a way to push back against efforts to decolonize the curriculum in particular universities. And yes, and I think, Hitchcock guy, as I said in the comments, basically, unlike in the US, it's also been subsumed in this country as part of a larger kind of pushback from pro-empire people, like Nigel Pigar, etc., who are using that, who are adopting that vocabulary of CRT.
Yeah. And we also
think,
had... oh, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think the whole Rhodes Must Fall is a kind of very good example here as well. Very kind of prescient and clear example of this sort of quite toxic, the kind of this idea that, somehow critical race theory must be tied in with Rhodes and this pushback against empire. And it's just like, well, maybe, but also like Rhodes was just a dick. Like, you don't need to bring critical race theory into it, really. It's like, do you want to celebrate this guy? You don't need to think about it that much. But yeah, I think Rhodes Must Fall has been quite a sort of like a totem almost of a lot of this. But it's like the word
correctly?
Go ahead.
Do I remember correctly there being a black woman in Parliament who gave a speech on critical race theory?
Yes.
I don't know if she used those.
Kemi
Did she use the phrase critical race theory?
Yeah. So there's Kemi Badenoch. So yeah, she was the problem with critical race theory, and
that was right around when Cynical Theories came out, and I think that had like a pretty big influence in the UK.
Yes, that's right. And so this would be actually a good point to mention why Helen was invited at all in the first place, because you've mentioned Chris Rufo. There's obviously James Lindsay as well. But Helen Pluckrose is currently writing a book on critical race theory.
I'm not sure. I mean, so there'll be at least... Well, maybe she'll try to subsume it all under that broad label. But I think it's generally... It's a volume. She's trying to get as many authors that aren't her as possible to sort of write a chapter on... one chapter per thinker, and to try to have a sort of like diverse range of black political thought. And so she was, she was asking for people who wants to write about Thomas Sowell, who wants to write about Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, but then also more progressive thinkers. I think Fanon, some black feminists like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks,
right.
And I just remember there being a sort of like leftover list of people who she hadn't found to write certain chapters yet, and like 3 of the authors' names were misspelled. So that's what she's working on now. But Cynical Theories was really her baby, her masterpiece. That in many ways James Lindsay sort of just takes credit for. When it's convenient to him, and doesn't take credit when it's convenient to him. So
right.
he actually now disagrees with the sort of like main argument of the book.
This is Cynical Theories, you mean?
Yeah. So I mean, he'll still probably sign on to most of the assessment of like the content of each individual chapter, but the main narrative of the book is like postmodernism. Has these roots in the academy, and these ideas have somehow evolved to come to be the wokeness virus that is threatening to destroy Western civilization, in fact. And so instead of postmodernism, James Lindsay has basically completely signed on to the anti-Semitic cultural Marxism plot. Yeah.
Right.
Didn't he say very recently that there was basically a genocide of white people going on or something? Like,
it was
that would happen.
It was on the cards, or the seeds. Yeah, the seeds.
And then Quillette started saying, "Oh, James Lindsay's gone too far," and it's like, and I wonder who's been enabling that. Claire.
That's right.
Who's been enabling.
Yeah, when Quillette says you've gone too far, you've really got to start to look at yourself in the mirror, I think.
Yeah.
Or pull out the calipers.
I was going to say, yeah. Like, if he pulled the calipers out, would it have then been okay? Like,
what do you call it, Joe? Calipers quarterly or weekly?
It's Ted McCormick calls James Lindsay Quillette's house craniologist. It's just ridiculous. It's like Quillette has enabled this, and then they've gone, "Oh, we didn't know he'd take it that far." It's like, this is what these people always do. They don't kind of stop at a level of, it gets worse and worse.
And so,
yeah.
So Sam, you wrote this this liberal currents essay, which I would encourage everyone to read, and it came out sort of right when the book was published. Is that right?
Oh yeah.
So, am I right in thinking you're a PhD student at CUNY? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And do you want to tell us a bit more about your kind of background, intellectual background, and so forth?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, graduated 2019, and then had been accepted, so went straight into my program at CUNY. At UCSB, I was a philosophy major, and the philosophy major doesn't have a ton of classes required in terms of like a mass, so I just took like a bunch of philosophy classes, like as many as I could. A lot of sort of I would say like fairly like analytic background, if people are familiar with the little analytic continental divide type of thing, but I did a lot of like philosophy of language and metaphysics stuff, and as well as some more like technical normative ethics, and I do like basically none of that now. I'm most interested in questions surrounding basically like the broadly, I'm interested in moral, social, and political philosophy, as well as where those sort of intersect with epistemology, and also particularly racial questions in that area. So, and that that is like, I'm inspired mostly by the work of Charles Mills, my professor, whose work I find like the best. I just like agree with him most of the time.
Right.
And
yeah, am I right in thinking Charles Mills, is he sort of trying to integrate a kind of racial justice concern into a kind of liberal,
that's right,
more or less like Rawlsian tradition, like kind of like theory of justice, but like you need to also deal with racial inequalities and
right. Yeah,
white
so he calls it
supremacy
black radical liberalism. And so
Okay.
he likes the Rawlsian conceptual apparatus of, you know, the veil of ignorance, but he thinks that the starting point needs to be adjusted so that our focus is in non-ideal theory rather than ideal theory. So rather than asking what are the principles of justice we would select, sort of starting fresh in a brand new society, we want to imagine that we're entering, you know, a deeply unjust society along class lines, gender lines, and racial lines like we have, and try to see what we would come up with from behind that veil of ignorance, what kinds of principles of justice we would have. And so it allows us to see how important it is to focus on things like corrective justice.
Right. Well, and I could see how that would be really useful in kind of moving from the ideal. What would you be like if you could choose which world you'd go into? You wouldn't choose yourself to be a racially oppressed person,
right?
And that's the Rawls position. But then I guess if you're going into a world that you know is unequal, what would you then do?
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so I'm curious because I obviously did follow this debate that you had the other day with. I'm trying to remember who they were.
But were Christian Watson, Karlin Borisenko, and Gothics.
Yeah, and so I'm ashamed to say I'd never heard of these folks before. But Gothics, I mean, she has like hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, she has 200,000 subscribers, and I did not know that going into the debate. That was going to be just like, I watched it over yesterday and like looked at the live comment feed, and it was traumatic. You know.
Really?
Yeah.
So I mean, it was just like one of those things where it's just like floating, people saying, "Who is this guy?" and
just, you know, from the jump. Just insults, just nonstop insults, you know, because they didn't really have anything to say about my arguments. So, yeah.
So I don't know if Leon or Joe, did you happen to see any of the debate?
I watched a little bit this morning. Something about crack. But it was really early, and I was like,
that clip from
what
the
is this
beginning. Oh
person
man.
on about? Can you maybe just explain what that was about? Sam?
Yeah. So if people go to my Twitter and go to the thread that's like the highlight reel, you'll see it. It's the first clip, and basically I was trying to explain how there's a problem. There's a problem, basically, like illustrating a point of critical race theory, that the fact that the law does not make reference to specific racial groups doesn't mean that it can't be enforced in racist ways or to achieve racist effects. And so, just like, it could be sort of classist to have laws that say that, you can't sleep on the sidewalk, right? And that doesn't specify that the rich people are allowed to or something, right? But similarly, there could be these things called mandatory minimums, where you have people who are convicted for possession of crack end up having to go to jail for a lot longer than people who are convicted for possession of powder cocaine. And so I made that point. And then Gothic said, so my question is just, why don't they just not use crack? And then I was like, well, why don't they just not use the drug? Yeah.
That's a plausible solution,
isn't it?
Yeah.
There's Dave also couldn't take it. There was a lot of people because it was like 2.5 hours long as well, wasn't it?
It's quite long.
I thought David had written, I took a small amount, like he was talking about crack for a minute. Misread that there, it's hot, excuse me. Do you find it difficult, Sam? I was just actually going to ask you, because obviously there were people of colour that you were debating. Is that something that you find difficult? Because
Not
there is
at
that
all.
dynamic, and it's like...
Yeah, in the moment,
So,
I
do you want to
wasn't
say a bit more
really
about that,
thinking about it. Like, it wasn't something that I was like focused on until at one point they had brought it up, which I thought was that I didn't say this out loud, but I could have, maybe I should have, because of how I had become familiar with Christian, who I was debating. Was that he is a spokesperson for this new, one of these new organizations. Like, have you heard of FAIR? That organization? So there's a new one. It's basically like the same thing, but it's called.
Is it Color Us United?
Color Us United. Right. So CUU, and so Christian is a spokesperson for Color Us United, and like their main operator, like their like chief strategists or whomever are James Lindsay and Chris Rufo.
Is that right?
Yeah, he's a spokesperson for them, and there were like multiple times, especially you see this in the post-debate stream that they had that we weren't invited to, of course, and multiple times it came up that they were like, I just, these are two white guys lecturing us. Or I think this was Gothic's talking about herself. She was like, me, a black woman.
Wasn't this after she refused to acknowledge that she was like, I'm a human being. I'm not black. I'm not a woman. And then 2 minutes later was like, don't talk to me, white boy. Like, you're not allowed to talk.
Black woman, right, yeah.
And it's like, you can have those positions, but you can't have them at the same time.
Yeah. No, so I mean, there's definitely like I don't think that was like something that they, that they were like looking for white people who supported critical race theory to debate or something, but they definitely like ended up using it to their advantage a couple of times.
It sort of seemed like when they were in a bit of a corner. So I think Kenny. I meant to pull this up. Is Kenny Zhu? Is he? He's done the difficult minority position, which is I think
he's got a book.
It's about Asians being smarter than white folks, and that makes racial issues a problem for,
Yeah.
I assume, black people?
For I think the way that they frame it is for like the entire woke narrative or the entire idea of intersectionality or whatever. I actually was just listening to, because I happened to stumble upon those two, Kenny and Christian, wrote an article together before our debate in which they argue that critical race theory does not continue the work of the civil rights movement, and rather it's a direct contradiction of the work of the civil rights movement. And in my debate, I actually tried to illustrate the exact opposite thesis by reading a bunch of quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. that reflect key principles of critical race theory. And Christian didn't have anything to say about that during the debate.
Right.
But then 2 days later, he tweeted his thing again.
He did Quillette piece, didn't he?
Yeah, right. So, but it had already been posted. So I was like, well, why don't you just raise your point in the debate? But I guess he didn't want to do that. So I was reading it now because I'm going to write a little Substack post about it.
All right.
And then so I had to while I was there, I listened to a clip from the Kenny Shue podcast, Quillette podcast, where he's being interviewed about his upcoming book.
Okay.
I mean,
it's anti.
Theory.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Joe.
I was just thinking, like, critical race theory is just a theory, isn't it? It's one way of examining or interrogating the thing that you're working on. It's the way that these people go on. It's like they're worried it's going to be the only thing that is ever used to examine,
Right.
To do all scholarship. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
it's one theory that some people might find useful to interrogate.
Yeah, and
stuff.
it's hardly
the same
even
as
a
queer
theory.
theory or whatever.
Right,
isn't it?
yeah,
it's
right.
a theory. It's a tool. It's not the way these people go on.
Well, it's an ideology. They claim it's an ideology that's like, what did did someone say it was like Mao?
Oh,
They said it's like the Mao Cultural Revolution, which I feel like Leon
I'm
would
sure
have some things to say about.
Some guy wouldn't be too happy about that.
I was asked to explain why it wasn't a Trojan horse for communism, and then I had to do a little bit of an explanation of the concept of the burden of proof.
Yeah, because it's like, how do you deal with like being asked questions in that way? Because I mean, they had this kind of get out clause of any time you actually started to speak, they would say, "Oh, whatever, academic, big words, jargon," and then at the same time, it was kind of like, you define your definition, and then you would, and then they'd say,
and then they'd be like, "Wait, you still haven't even defined it." Yeah, they would continue to say that. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's just like, how do you deal with, because you were very composed, and we should also say Aaron was there as well from Embrace the Pod.
Aaron was much better than I was. So I mean, I thought I was like pretty good. I mean, I waited until Carlin started, going off and doing
giving you the finger and so forth.
Yeah, she was behaving, sort of like a 12-year-old, and so then I guess I felt comfortable enough to let loose a little bit. And also it's just hard I have a very expressive face. So, I'm out here just like listening to the debate and then just going,
I don't know if that's right.
Right. And there's people in the chat like, stop making faces. Oh, you're so rude. Like, oh man. And multiple times also like Carlin, we would ask Carlin a question. We were like, Carlin, you the example you cite of critical race theory gone, run amok in K through 12 education. Are you aware that example was completely thoroughly debunked about a month before you uploaded your video? And she wouldn't answer that, and then she would say, do you support equality of outcome or equality of opportunity? Just like start with a new question. I would just crack up. Like, so I was just laughing like very loudly. And And
Let's
so
see if I can pull up some of these highlights. So
When it comes
let's
to the
see.
burden.
I asked, how do you know it's not a way to usher in communism? And the reason that I'm asking this is because I've had conversations with people that have gone through Marxist indoctrination, and they see similarities. So what would you say to that, to someone that is saying, I've already gone through this, and I'm seeing similarities in
Can I take this?
education? Whoever.
Yeah. So when it comes to the burden of proof in an argument, usually the person who's making the positive claim is the person who needs to demonstrate evidence for that claim, right? If I claim that God exists, right, I can't just argue against you, well, what evidence do you have that God doesn't exist, right? That would be sort of intellectually dishonest. So when you say, what evidence do you have that it's not a communist, Trojan horse, I feel the same way as if somebody was asking me, what evidence do you have that God doesn't exist? So I want to ask you for what your evidence is. Or, I mean, you sort of just suggested, right, is that you have interviews with people and they claim that they see similarities. So I guess then I would want to know what their argument is.
If I could just piggyback on that, hold on. If I could just piggyback on that before you run and respond, Gotrix. This is very similar to me asking, well, look, Hoover was very convinced that MLK was a communist sympathizer and was part of a communist plot to bring down America. What evidence do you have that proves for sure that MLK was not, in fact, a tool of communism or socialism or something like that, right? You could present some things, I can present some things back, right? We can have an argument about it, but I do think it's important to understand for people engaged in the Red Scare, right? This was a conspiracy, a widespread conspiracy theory for which there was very little evidence and which caused a great deal of harm.
Okay, I have a really simple question. Do you believe in equality of outcomes or equality of opportunity?
Before we go to that, that's a good question, but I want to hear the answer to Sam's question, which was what evidence the Gothics has, or Christian, or any of you who want to answer it.
This is but this is the evidence. This is the evidence right here. No, this is the evidence. Do you believe in equality of outcomes or equality of opportunity?
What do you mean?
I mean, you say you've got an expensive face that this woman has got
I know.
You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
there you go.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, what did we decide? Is it equality of outcome or
So
opportunity?
I asked her to
on the spot.
define her terms. I was like, I asked for some clarification. I was like, well, what do you mean equality of outcome? You talking about like we all have like the same baseline, like everyone gets enough food to eat, or like everyone gets exactly the same amount of pennies in their pocket? And she was like, no, Sam, no, we're not going to get fancy. Answer the question. I was like,
yeah, both.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Depends.
It's just such a false dichotomy, and like,
And I also don't understand how it's evidence for what you were
it's
talking
not.
about.
It's definitely not evidence.
And so I think that eventually, when pressed, Gothics did say that someone on her show said they had been through the Cultural Revolution and the woke crisis was similar. One person said that.
Yeah, she had talked to one person, right?
And the burden of proof was now on you to prove that critical race theory was not a communist plot because of that.
So I think like the burden of proof argument that I just like laid out worked, and then so she tried something later on. She was like taking notes throughout, and I guess she came up with something. And what her criticism was, one of the things that we see in the Cultural Revolution is like this sort of like self renunciation where you sort of like shame yourself, and it's a lot like these struggle sessions where white people have to just say that they're super racist, and they have to admit to all their shameful racist acts, and she was like, this kind of self-criticism is really dangerous, I think. And then Aaron was just like, well, yeah, self-criticism, like anything else, is healthy in good doses and unhealthy in ridiculous doses. And then she sort of was like, well, yeah.
Well, because it sort of seems like this is what I'm curious about, is kind of how to do, because we obviously run this debate program, but no one other than Eric Kaufman actually takes us up on it. But you've actually debated kind of the so my experience of watching it was you seem to keep looking for points at which is like, okay, let's agree on this so that we can now go on to this. And it was sort of like their strategy was like, if you were building a bridge, it's like every time you put a board down, it's like smash, like get that board out of the way so that there was like no possibility of getting across. Offense. Right. Because, so that's kind of, I suppose, what I'm curious about is on the one hand, it's sort of like, why have you do you feel like, is this what you signed up to go to graduate school to do, or is it debate something that you feel like really urgent, that this like moral panic is happening and someone needs to intervene?
So yeah. I mean, I also like debating, but I don't have like a formal training in it or anything. Like Christian, I think you saw he's sort of skilled with the sophistical techniques, like when he needs them. He was a high school debater, and so right. He's got the cadence and that sort of thing. I don't have the practice, but I enjoy it. But no, like basically I never expected to do most of the stuff that I find myself doing on Twitter and stuff. Basically what happened was I posted that book review of Cynical Theories, and then like 2 days later I had 1,500 followers when I had like 200 the day before. And I was like, oh, I guess people want to hear what I think now. Mm-hmm. And so have been sort of just like continuing, but yeah, mostly has been just a response to everything that we've seen since then, because it's really just gotten a lot worse, and it's really spilled over into mainstream politics in a way that I was not at all expecting around this time a year ago.
Yeah, and I think even for us as well. I mean, we've been following the free speech thing in England, which has been around. I think I'm sure Leon and Joe know. Like, what was it? Safe spaces they were worried about, and then social justice warriors.
2015, 14, 15.
Trigger warnings.
Trigger warnings.
Snowflakes. Snowflakes who couldn't handle, difficult material. I just want to say, though, Sam, why didn't you ask them, well, what's wrong with communism? Like, what did you say? I know this is Americans, and you guys are all terrified
basically,
of
that's
socialism,
basically the reason, right?
I'd be like, if it's the right kind of communism, what's wrong with that?
There's no right kind of communism out here.
Well, I know,
no
but
right
I
kind.
just, I think probably that Carlin woman would have exploded, I think, at that point, if you'd said that.
But they do seem to be worried. They do seem to be worried in the U.S. about the kind of like job training, and that's something that Kaufman is really concerned about as well. This kind of like they're calling something critical race theory, which has this like critical legal studies, like intellectual. It's like really, it's like really refined kind of like intellectual substance. I feel like it's like it's like a really valid theory. Like, I might not agree with all of it, but it's like it's solid. Mm-hmm. You might teach it as a position, like you might teach feminist scholars or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then they seem to be talking about the kind of like diversity training that like corporations receive, and they're calling that critical race theory. And then they're throwing onto a
buzzword, I think, honestly. Like,
yeah, so actually just going back to what's that?
Isn't that training just like don't be a dick to other people? It's like got nothing to do with like any
sometimes
it's just like
sometimes you get a particularly like cringe one. Like there was like pictures of a Coca-Cola one. There's a slide just says like be less white. It's just like, okay, guys.
Oh, crikey.
That's just like that's hurting the like.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't that comes down. I always think that comes down to you get a random rogue teacher who's just not very good, like a trainer, who misunderstands the point. I mean, Robin DiAngelo is not helping a huge amount. I don't feel because
I also think that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a bit of a white savior.
And you've done some analysis of DiAngelo as well, right?
Yeah. So I eventually want to put this, turn this into an actual academic paper. But then also a more op-ed-y type of paper. So I gave a talk at the Eastern APA meeting in January. That was just a quick little 25-minute talk where I basically lay out what I think are the central flaws of the approaches to anti-racism that you find in Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, and Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Right. And because I think that ultimately they're both just sort of weak, they're not, for a scholarly audience. Right. And as such, they don't address any counter examples or counter arguments or anything like that. And then when you do raise some, it starts to fall apart.
Right. Yeah, and that's I guess an issue with any popular, sociology or whatever. You have to trade the kind of rigor for this is just a headline grabbing catchphrase type of thing. And with DiAngelo, it's literally just the title of the book, White Fragility, and everybody thinks they know what that is without reading it. She's like the Benedict Anderson of popular sociology with Imagined Communities guy, who no one has ever read that actual book. It's just what has been cited so many times.
I really think I said this when I was on a panel on pro and anti critical race theory a month or two ago, and I really genuinely think that a huge factor in DiAngelo rising to the top of the New York Times bestsellers list and then staying at it for all of last summer is that people assumed that she was black just by hearing her name, Robin DiAngelo, and seeing White Fragility. Right, we have a famous artist named DiAngelo, who's a black man.
Oh yeah, of course, with the organ. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Right. He's supposed to have an album coming out this year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But. And I think a lot of people just assumed, and I've talked to multiple people who are like, "No, yeah, I did," and it's it's already at the top of the list when Floyd happens. So then Floyd happens, people go there, see that book, they're like, "Oh, I gotta buy one book, right? It's the anti-racism summer," and I feel like a ton of well-meaning white people just bought that book, and it's been sitting on their shelf collecting dust.
Yeah, and I mean, it is hard for white people to talk about racism, but it's why would you center white people's feelings in this particular moment? It's I don't think critical race theory was oh, we really got to get Robin DiAngelo out there.
Right. Critical race theory, when people ask me, why is it that, sometimes people accuse me of a no true Scotsman when I say DiAngelo's not doing critical race theory. It's well, no, critical race theorists don't care about individual white people. They're looking at racism as it manifests as a systemic institutional issue. They don't give a shit about this, psychic monologue that white people have in their head when they're trying to determine whether they can, make eye contact with a black person on the street or something like that. Right. And these are the kinds of things that she,
Well, it's Liam Neeson is
oh yeah,
the Liam Neeson fantasy or whatever. But yeah, and yeah, but it's one of the things I was struck by was in your original review of Lindsay and Pluckrose, it was social justice was this phantom, and now it's critical race theory. So.
Well, yeah. So actually, in the book, they have a chapter on critical race theory, but now because I think Lindsay has seen Rufo on a path to surpass him in GOP influence, and he recognizes that this critical race theory is where it's at, and then he went, he went and did a PragerU video explaining what he claims is critical race theory. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well, did he say he was a world level expert?
Oh man! Oh my God! I forgot about that. Oh, so when
what even is isn't James Lindsay like a mathematician?
he's a math.
Am I
PhD.
getting it wrong?
No, yeah,
Yeah.
a math PhD, and I have there's a mathematician who follows me on Twitter and frequently like replies to some of my stuff, and he said that like his PhD, he's surprised that they awarded it because it's not really like an original contribution. It's more like it's kind of like a survey paper, but in math. Not that I'm not qualified to
Well, and is it Carolyn Porsenko? She got
a PhD at a degree mill.
Yeah, where it was like you just pay the money and they give you a PhD. I think.
Oh,
and then she says
80% acceptance rate into the PhD program.
Which how much?
80% or something like
80%. Yeah. Imagine being those 20% that didn't make the cut. It's like, what do you have to do?
Just drop out or something. I don't know. They withdrew their application.
Well, we don't have too much time because I won't keep everyone past 3 or so. But one of the things I think I'm interested in, and maybe something that we could think about in kind of what brings all of these things together. And critical race theory clearly seems to be like the boogeyman of the day. Mm-hmm. But in the UK, there's also this huge like gender critical, are women being silenced thing, and free speech in that direction. And one of the really interesting things is the way everything gets accused of being an ideology. So it's like there's an academic theory that's like gender theory or critical race theory. And as scholars, I think we're used to being like, okay, let's find some citations. Let's like quote this person, do like a close reading, get under the skin and like maybe present someone else and like really carefully go through it. And I think what's interesting is the way that these theories are just being taken up in the public sphere now. And they're just like, critical race theory says all white people should die. And it's like, whoa. Nobody said that anywhere. Right. And it's like, how do you, as an academic, like engage in that?
Race theorist said that doesn't mean critical race theory says that, right?
And then they're like, it's an ideology. They're like indoctrinating the children. We need to ban it in the school. Like, there's this whole kind of like something that and I feel like this could happen almost to any academic subject at this point now, where it's like you're just going along, minding your own business, and then all of a sudden there's like
next thing you know,
Tom Cotton is like, we've got to stop.
No, this happened. I remember I watched it happen to a professor that I follow who is a former colleague of Charles Mills when Charles was back at, I think it was Northwestern. His name is Barner Hess, and he's in I don't know whether it's African American studies or Black studies at that university. But he has this, this graphic of this sort of concept that he developed of like these 8 different identities of 8 different kinds of white identity, from like white supremacist on one end to like white abolitionist on the other, right? And these are like just sort of, kind of silly, but like, okay.
Yeah, it's like the hipster handbook for...
It's like, right. And then one day, Chris Rufo's like, I found a principal who sent this to some parents, and now it's going to be in the New York Post and then Fox News and then every other conservative media article for 2 weeks. And so I saw him like the next day, like account locked, like, he had to shut it down because
they'll descend.
His name was in the graphic.
They'll descend. So I mean, because I've seen you quite regularly kind of involved in these debates, but it must feel a bit like David and Goliath sometimes, where you've got hundreds of thousands of followers, and if there's a culture war at the moment, it does seem like they're winning by quite a large margin. They're getting the laws,
because I think their systems are very much set up for it. I mean, a lot of people will talk about there being like a liberal bias in the media. That is such an oversimplified story, and like there's a machine on the right of the propaganda machine. Like it's a well-oiled machine, and it's like 3 people controlling it, and they know how to do it, and they have the backing from the think tanks and the big money that's backing it, and they know that this is what they have to do because none of their policies are popular. Like they can't get any votes based on that, so they have to make it look like the left wants to kill Mr. Potato Head, and they're gonna cancel Dr. Seuss, and they're gonna I don't know.
Yeah, they've banned like sombreros from
Everything.
College parties.
There's gonna be 22-year-old men playing soccer with your 5-year-old daughter or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as you pointed out, it's there's an organized apparatus to get this. So the idea that like critical race theory is a more powerful ideological vehicle in terms of like the penetration into schools, into media discourse, into like getting onto people at the dinner table being like, I heard this insane thing of this, 8 identities of whiteness or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they know how to make these propaganda things
and there's
happen.
Easy like examples to fall back on because people have seen Robin DiAngelo, in the spotlight, because people have seen Ibram Kendi say some stupid things, at some point. And because they've seen him also get $10 million donation from the CEO of Twitter, right? That makes him look like he's even more taking over the culture or something like that. And so it's really insane to me how, because people, I remember the girl I was dating at the time when I put this article out, and then for up until a while, like more recently, she would get so tired of me talking about James Lindsay, understandably, right? Because I'm not really talking to anyone else at all, like much anyways. My parents don't want to hear about James Lindsay. My sister, my brothers don't want to hear about it. So
Princess Diana once said to Prince Charles, there are 3 people in this marriage. But obviously she was talking about Camilla Parker Bowles, but in your case it would be James Lindsay,
Yeah, right.
Well, it's like this one particular time I sort of disturbed myself when I was typing my name into like a form, and I typed in Eric, and autocorrect suggested I put in Eric Kaufman.
Oh no!
As like, and I was like, gosh, I'm probably engaging a bit too much with this like
and
peer
now,
review.
Like, I talked to her. I'm like, Liz, literally James Lindsay's taking over the GOP. Like 9 months ago, you're like, will you stop talking about James? Nobody cares about James Lindsay. He's just this weird guy who won't get off Twitter. I'm like, he took over the GOP.
Yeah,
he's the chief strategist. Like, yeah.
Well, and I think you're
Trying
absolutely
to win Liz
right.
back, because I don't know if that's going to work.
No. We're just friends, We talk all the time. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, maybe we should call it, because I'm sure everyone's got academic research and whatnot to do. But
I got more Lindsay research.
Do what you love, and turn it into scholarship and whatnot. But thank you, Sam, for all of your work to fight the culture war. We're doing what we can over here, but it's an uphill battle. So I appreciate all of the resources you're providing there.
Keep it up,
I literally
Sam.
don't know what else to do with myself physically. So, thank you all for having me on. This was a blast. I hope we would do it again.
Well, I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. Thanks so much, Sam.
Cool.
And Woke Sorcerer, some guy, I'll see you soon.
And Helen, show up next time.
See you.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, bye. Free speech.